Okay, so now we have a unit on civil rights. We're not going to cover other uh, movements such as the Chicano movements, women's liberation movement, nothing like that. That's a separate one with the 60s. Civil rights is in its own because it's so massive and so much to undertake. But let's go ahead and get started with civil rights. First thing you have to know is that civil rights actually stems from these three amendments. These are called Civil War amendments. After the Civil War, we had a 13th Amendment that banned slavery, 14th Amendment that defined citizenship, mainly because so many people were born here. And in the South, people would say, well, you're not citizens, you're slaves. Fine, you're not slaves, but you're not citizens. The 14th Amendment was created to define citizenship as being born in America, 14th Amendment. And also, the big one that students often don't realize, what people don't realize, is the Equal Protection Act. The Equal Protection and a Law for All Citizens. This is a big one when it comes to civil rights, saying that these laws have to apply to everybody, not just selected people. It pretty much meant every state law had to do so. And then, of course, the 15th Amendment gives all citizens, male citizens, the right to vote regardless of color. Remember, this was passed way before 19th Amendment, when women had the right to vote. So it was based on all male suffrage, race or color does not matter. So these are the three Civil War amendments. So I always have my students answer these in their own words on their notes to define each one. You have to know these because everything makes sense if you know these. So we'll get started from that. So knowing these, you can actually move forward and think about some of the stuff. Again, I'm gonna have questions here. I'm gonna do a countdown right before I answer. So if ever these questions come up, you can feel free to pause the video and try to give it a go. In 3, 2, 1. Now, on this one, I actually did not cover this yet, but I want my students to try to figure out a typical STAAR question without actually knowing what we talked about so they can try to uncover it. And in this case, through process of elimination, they would be able to get rid of the court cases. And they would know it's not desegregation armed forces. They know it would be C. So this one I actually just used in my class just to see if they have the critical thinking skills. All right, so Jackie Robinson is where we're going to start with this in 47. He becomes the first African-American baseball player in Major League Baseball. Now, why is this a TEK, or it was a TEK, now you just have no civil rights in general. Well, baseball is one of the most difficult ones to break through, and so him doing so does start something. It does have a huge effect. Excellent movie. It's called Movie 42. For most part, historically accurate. There's just a couple of small things that's off a little bit. In 1948, you'll have Truman would desegregate the armed forces, partially because it's after World War II. Guys like the Tuskegee Airmen proved that African Americans were equals, if not better in some cases, in many cases. So Truman says it's dumb. Desegregate armed forces with the executive order. You could do that because the armed forces was underneath his command as president of the United States. If you want to desegregate public places like, or restaurants or schools, that's going to take an act of Congress or something similar. But executive order, the president can do that to armed forces because he's under their command. So give a try at this question. Only 26 students got this one right on STAAR. And this is in 2023, 2024. 3, 2, 1. And I think the most recent students got that wrong. It's just they weren't taught that specific executive order. Okay, here's another one. Three, 2, 1. So I like to bring this up to my students to see if they can try to figure something out. Most of the time they don't know this. They've never seen this picture. They've heard of this court case, but they don't know it. But it's about this man right here. And his court case will lead to what we see here. Colored dining room in the rear, separate water fountains, colored only benches. The answer? We go backwards. This fountain does not look like that fountain, does it? All right. benches or rooms or making people go to the rear to enter, that's not equal. It's definitely separate, but it's not equal. From Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay. Now, also called Jim Crow laws. I always make sure my students know that in case they see the word Jim Crow laws instead of separate but equal. But that's where it stems from. Backstory: Plessy disagree with a law that said if you ride in a train car, there's separate ones for whites and blacks. And if you can see, he doesn't look black hardly at all. I think he's 1/16th. He was chosen specifically because he looked so white that it looked ridiculous in newspapers to deny him. So they're hoping to challenge that law and stop it in future laws like that. Because the 14th Amendment said equal protection, right? And so he's hoping to challenge all these laws like this. So they pick a perfect guy that's going to look the part, go to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, hey, it can be separate but equal. And so they say it's equal protection as long as it's equal, it needs to be separate. It has to be the same thing, right? Now, we know that's not true. We know separate is not equal. But for the Supreme Court, it said it can be separate as long as it's equal and it still is okay with equal protection. Now, that's 1896. That's a long, long time, right? And so this ends up being the rule of the law of the land. The nickname becomes Jim Crow laws, but you and me know it as segregation, plain and simple. Now I have this cartoon here to show you, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. That lasts from 1896 for over 50 years, all the way up until 60 years later, we have Brown versus Board, which overturns that. So we see the connection. And even though Plessy versus Ferguson is so far back, if Plessy versus Ferguson never happened, all the civil rights issues wouldn't have happened. So when we start thinking about all the civil rights issues of the 50s and 60s, the reason why people are so upset is because we go back to the Civil War in 1896. All this stuff has been playing out for so long, and we can't forget how long people have been suffering in these conditions. So when you want to pause this, and then I'm going to help you guys do it in 3, 2, 1. Three, two, one. Okay. Jim Crow laws, again, that's why I've always told my students separate but equal segregation. Another word for it is Jim Crow laws. Okay. At this point, my kids will take the Texas Alabama literacy test, and I'll give them 10 minutes to complete it. In reality, you have 25 minutes, but I'll give them 10 minutes for the purposes of trying to finish on time. And then even once they do that, even if they do okay with it, you can only miss 7. I show them opening scene of Selma, which shows that even if you were perfect and did everything, you pay the poll tax, you pass the literacy test, you can see what happens to her. I can't show you in this video without getting copyright and sued or whatever. Now, Plessy versus Ferguson is 1896, so that goes way back. And there is no segregation touched until 1950 in the case Sweat versus Painter. This is a pivotal court case. Essentially, a black student applies to UT Law School. He gets accepted, shows up, wait, you're black, you can't come here. And so what UT does is it makes a separate school, separate black school in a downtown basement in Houston, away from Austin, actually altogether. And they say, hey, we have an equal law school for blacks, so we're not violating separate but equal. It's over there in Houston, knock yourself out. Good luck with that. And of course, it goes to the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court makes a ruling. Like, this is clearly not equal. Like, it's not. And so they actually make a ruling, and they said, separate can't be equal. Really, Sweat versus Painter is the beginning of overturning Plessy versus Ferguson. It's a separate but equal is inherently unequal, meaning that there's no way two things can be perfectly the same, no matter what. The water fountain, one's going to have lower pressure, one's going to be more dirty, one's going to be rusty. There's always going to be something different about them. And because there's something different, it's never going to be equal. In this case, it was obvious. Like, this guy is going to law school to be a lawyer, to work with other lawyers and judges and in the legal system. But now you're putting him in a city basement away, and he won't interact with those future lawyers. That's definitely not equal. And so Sweat versus Painter is important. It doesn't overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. We don't always say that. It's the beginning. Because that same argument, that's separate but equal, is inherently unequal. The lawyers will use that in the next court case of Brown versus Board of Education. This young man right here is Thurgood Marshall, becomes the most influential people of this time. He is going to go before Supreme Court, find these 9 judges. He argues in Brown versus Board of Education that that's it's not equal. Now, the difference for Brown versus Board is it's actually in public schools. Sweat versus Painter was only for college, and that's it. Segregation was illegal in college. Brown versus Board of Education said no longer allowed in public schools, and that changes everything. That's when they have to do it. Now, not at first. Like, I have this note on here. A year later, nothing was done. The Supreme Court actually made a second statement and said this should be done as quickly as possible. They use the words with all deliberate speed. So they didn't just drop it and let it go. They said it needs to be done. Thurgood Marshall is a lawyer for NAACP. They lobby, they push for litigation, things like that. Mainly they work through litigation and laws and represent other African Americans. That's when he's as a lawyer. He's in the Supreme Court arguing to the Supreme Court. Later on, he'll become the first black Supreme Court justice. Thurgood Marshall will be, as almost like a full circle turn. So you have to know him for a STAAR test and just understand that Thurgood Marshall is that important. Starts off young as a lawyer for NAACP, argues one of the most important cases in U.S. history. Eventually, he'll become Supreme Court. He'll be on the court listening to arguments later. So this should be an easy one to do. I'm going to answer in 3, 2, 1. I don't know how only 56% of students in Texas got that right. Now, this is a 2-part question, okay? That means on a STAAR test, if you get the first one right, you get +1. You get the second one right, you get another +1, okay? Or you can get the first one right, get +1, get the second question wrong, and get +0. But if you miss the first one, you cannot get credit for the second one. Kind of weird, but it makes sense because if you get the first one right and not the second one, like that's normal. But if you don't get the first one right and you get the second one right, you're just guessing. All right, so these questions typically work like this. You got an excerpt. You've got to read it and answer the question. This is, how did Brown versus Board of Education ruling affect the civil rights movement? Okay, the answer is B. All right, but then the catch for part B, that's the answer, is that you actually have to say what statement from the excerpt provides evidence to support your answer in A. So whatever you put in A, why did you put that? So you can see why. If you get the first one right, it's +1. Second right, it's +2. But if you get the first one wrong, it's 0. So they're not going to give you credit for the next one, no matter what you get on the next one. If you get the first one wrong, the second one's going to be wrong no matter what. Okay, so just know that. So in just a second, I'm about to answer the question. All right, the answer's coming 3, 2, 1, C. That quote tells us. All right, so the Black Power movement, civil rights in general, we separate them into 2 different organizations: nonviolent and militant. I did not say violence. This is not violence. They're not pro-violence. They're militant. I'll explain that in a second. Teachers often still do this incorrectly, and this is why students have trouble in state tests. Nonviolent, I teach my kids, they know about Martin Luther King. He preached nonviolence. He lived it. One of his heroes was Gandhi and Jesus, nonviolent people. NAACP, they did not use violence. They lobbied to Congress to change laws, but they were really big on litigation, fighting the laws. All the Supreme Court cases are done by the NAACP. And then what's known as Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. I don't know why you actually pronounce the acronym, but you do. They believe in nonviolence as well. And we're going to talk about them a little more in depth. Now, these groups of people are militant. That doesn't mean they're violent. Oftentimes, it means you attack me, I'm going to attack you, kind of thing. Malcolm X said by any means necessary. He believed that. But for him, it was, I remember some people firebombed his home, and he ran outside with a gun because the little girls was in there. He didn't want them to get hurt, so he ran out with a gun to shoot them, and people were appalled that he was carrying this gun outside. Like, media was upset about it. And he was like, you know what? If somebody did it to your house, wouldn't you get a gun to defend your family? Why am I any different? So it's a response. That's why it's not violent, it's a militant, which is a response at violence brought upon him. Okay, black Muslims believe that religion should be the religion of all African Americans, because technically, if you think about it, African America, if you had a dominant religion, it was Islam. Most parts was tribalism still, but North was people were Muslim. So these people made the argument that black Christians aren't following their roots because they were brought here and forced to be Christian. That's not their roots. But they were by far not militant at most. Black Panthers demanded right to determine their own destiny. I mean, these guys, they marched when like neighborhoods were bad neighborhoods and cops wouldn't march through there or patrol. The Black Panthers stood up and did it. They patrolled armed, but to stop crime. They actually provided food for children in poor neighborhoods and training and things like that. The Black Panthers showed up where the government failed to show up. But they were militant. They were willing to use force if necessary. So these are our two groups you always have to know. I've got so many questions about this. During the Civil Rights Movement, Black Panthers' party tactics differed from those of Martin Luther King Jr. because the Black Panthers called for war. Here comes in 3, 2, 1. Okay, pause this, and I'm going to answer it. And 3, 2, 1. Here's another one. Okay. Even if I never even taught you this yet, you would know who's violent and who's non-violent, right? And so based on using means necessary, I don't see Malcolm X on here. So the answer is Black Panther Party. Okay, pause it. 3, 2, 1. All right, so the birth of the nonviolent movement actually starts, I would argue, with the Montgomery bus boycott. That's a big one. We know the story of Rosa Parks. She refused to move from her seat, and she was arrested. By the way, this actually happened previously with somebody else, but the other person wasn't a good role model. So they planned this all out. And once Rosa Parks is arrested, as you see again, she's light complected, so she doesn't look black. So in pictures, black and white pictures, she actually looks white. So again, you take a picture, put it in front paper, said they would let this woman sit up front. People are like, why does it matter? She looks white. So she did choose this. She was trained with the NAACP. She was a secretary at the local chapter. So she was perfect for it. So it was kind of staged, but it happened previously to a teenage girl who had a bad attitude, apparently, and they didn't want to use her. So she does it. She refuses to move from the front when white people board the bus, and she's arrested. And as a response, Martin Luther King will organize and lead a 381-day boycott of the bus system in Montgomery. And he wins. Montgomery gives in. Before laws are passed, actually, Montgomery gives in and says, okay, we'll desegregate the bus system. Please come back. Martin Luther King did this by organizing meetings at churches for carpooling. And the church is like really essential in civil rights. And even now, you can argue it's pretty essential. There's actually, I think it was Mississippi, Alabama, or Georgia, I can't remember which one, but they actually were trying to outlaw voting on Sunday. And the people behind it wanted to do that because that's when most black people actually vote, is after church. They go together to go vote. And so there was whole fuss about it, and they dropped it. But we see these laws they clearly have a target, but they're trying to make them legal nonetheless. But the church is essential for this as it organizes this boycott. It works and proves a couple things. In the long standing of things, when we say one, it proves nonviolence works. So Martin Luther King is reaffirmed in that. And he becomes famous for the civil disobedience, refusing to go against society, being disobedient, but in a civil manner, not being violent. He becomes infamous for that. And he becomes the leader of the civil rights, and that's why we know him so well. I do have a clip from Selma, the movie, that shows you how far he goes in the late 60s. He goes from this in 55, the Montgomery boycott that starts everything, to Selma at the end of the 60s, who's really developed a persona and a career in this. And there's just a few things you'll notice in there. Why they do things is probably the most important thing I have on here. If you watch this clip, Martin Luther King makes it clear the reason they protest is so that there's a reaction from the bad guys, bad sheriffs who beat them, torture them, arrest them, and people see it on TV. And when people see that done to them on TV and they're being peaceful, it wins people over across the country, across the world, actually. So that's a good thing you get from the movie Selma with the exchange. It's like 28 minutes into it with the exchange between Martin Luther King and the local Snook chapter. There's a big, there's tension there. And Martin Luther King explains, this is what we do. We show up, we protest, we hope it pisses them off and they do something stupid, and it goes on national TV. And the country sides with us. And then the government has to do something when they see us being beaten on TV, and people get upset about that. So it's a whole process. He starts here with Montgomery. Not Martin Luther King, he's communist. This is actually at NAACP training, and somebody took this picture, and then the people that hated Martin Luther King were like, he's communist. He's at a communist training. It's a billboard. It's an actual billboard. Science works. All right, I'm going to answer this question in 3, 2, 1. Okay, go ahead and pause this if you need to. I'm going to answer it in 3, 2, 1. That was from 2023, so it's still kind of funny, kind of refreshing. It's still fresh. Now, this one is a tough one. Only 42% of students right. If you look at the TEKS, it's such a vague TEK. If you read it, shape American culture. So my students, I encourage them to know civil rights does use the church, and hoping that might help them. But the answer to this is actually D. Oddly enough, 41% of students actually put this. It's clearly a guess for most people. So I'm not surprised. I don't know if my students would have got this right as well. Backwards, sad, right? Now, Supreme Court issues the Brown versus Board of Education and says you have to desegregate, but people weren't doing it. In the South, they were refusing to do it. In South NAACP, they actually organized for 9 students to go to Little Rock High School in Arkansas. The governor of Arkansas does not like that, and he stops it. Orville Fabius is the governor there. What he's going to do is call a National Guard, a state National Guard, and make them stand in the hall doorway and not let these students go. Eisenhower, as president of the United States, his job is to enforce the laws. He actually consults a preacher named Billy Graham, which is like a spiritual advisor for him and other presidents, and says, you got to do something. You have to do something. So the very next day, Eisenhower calls up the National Guard because he's the president, so he can nationalize them. And he tells them, your job now is to make sure these 9 African-American students go to school safely the whole year. So what we have here is the governors of the South all were the same. This is how I teach my students. I don't care which governor of the South it is. They all had the same idea, same concept. Keep segregation the way it is. Keep the status quo, the system like that. They didn't want segregation changed. They didn't want integration or desegregation, whatever you want to call it. Depends on which test. But same thing, desegregation, integration. These governors of the South didn't want this. So every time you see anything about governors of the South, that's their goal to stop it from happening. The president steps in and says, no, this has to happen. The Supreme Court ruled, make it happen. And at the University of Alabama, at college, George Wallace made a famous stand and refused to let African-American students enter. Eventually, he does move out of the way and allow it to happen, but it makes like a symbolic stand saying the tyrannical federal government is telling us states what to do, and he's fighting for state rights. George Wallace is a guy that's extremely racist. The famous phrase he has is segregation yesterday, segregation today, and segregation forever. And he gives us in front of the Confederate flags, and he talks about how great the South is. He'll later on run for president. He'll get shot, kind of deserves it. Survives, and he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He never comes close to becoming president. But he is one of the biggest opponents to desegregation. He's very difficult. But I always teach my students, all these Southern governors were like this. They want to keep segregation. And that there's a link, if it sounds familiar, you've seen this in Forrest Gump. You can actually look it up. The one most famous one, it's actually this lady right here. Later on, she'll apologize for her actions and say she was wrong from it. But she always wanted this young lady to just forget about it. She didn't. I don't blame her. But there's a whole controversy there if you can look it up, nonetheless. I do think it's interesting because when we look at people who wanted to integrate, you often see this example from here. Race mixing is, you guessed it, communism. Again, it's the 60s during the Cold War. It's always communism. Okay. There's other issues as well, like Ruby Bridges. She faced some pretty tough times in Louisiana when she tried to integrate a school. They had to have marshals supporting her at all times. And like, this is how bad people were. They like had baby coffins whenever it came to children. You can see just how unreal how they enjoy this way too much. The people the white mobs here are horrible people. Some of them do recant this. All right, let's try to answer some questions. I'm gonna circle the correct answer in 3, 2, 1. This is why I always teach kids status quo. This is our TEKS. It just says they kept the status quo. If a student doesn't know what status quo means, they're not going to understand that. So I just always say all these Southern Democrat governors wanted to keep it the way it was, which was segregation. So I'm going to answer this question in 3, 2, 1. Now, this is when I get to finally teach about SNCC. SNCC is actually born from a movement. It's called the sit-in. Areas where they refuse to serve black students or black people. These college students typically would come in together, some whites, some blacks, and they would sit at the counter and they refused to leave until they were served. Now they had money, they were paying for it. They're like, hey, we want to pay for our food here, but it said no blacks allowed. You have to enter through the rear, or there's no blacks allowed in the restaurant at all. If you want to order food, you have to do it from the back door. That's segregation, Jim Crow laws. These students challenged them by sitting in and refusing to leave until they were served. They oftentimes face problems like this, but sometimes there's violence. There was the Arkansas governor. He would go crazy with an axe hammer and chase them out of his restaurant. He actually sold his restaurant and ran for governor and won. But that's Arkansas for you. But the SNCC, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was actually born from this. And it would spread, and there would be different chapters of SNCC at different colleges all across the South trying to advocate for this. But SNCC doesn't finish with that. They also are known for freedom riders. They got on these buses to prove how bad the South was segregated and what would happen. And so they would load these buses, and then they would go to towns on these buses. They would sit in the wrong sections. The blacks would sit in whites only, and the whites would sit in the black section, or what's called the colored section in restaurants, lobbies, dining rooms, whatever it might be. They did the exact opposite of what they were supposed to do. And they did it because they wanted to show people how bad it was in the South and that things weren't getting better at all. And they wanted government to do something. The government knew these laws, knew what was going on, but the government wasn't enacting on this stuff. They just weren't doing it. Kennedy was president at the time. Eventually, he does have to do something. So Freedom Riders ended. With the Freedom Rides, these people get beaten so bad that Kennedy has to actually do something. Like their buses are bombed with Molotov cocktails. It's pretty destructive. But Kennedy actually has to send in the army to escort them throughout the South. And he has to put the pressure on people in the South to stop this. Again, this is all televised. And so people are seeing this on the news thinking, what's the big deal? Just let these kids sit wherever they want on the bus. What does it matter where they sit in the restaurant? It's not worth beating them over. That's crazy that you're beating them to almost their death. It becomes pretty crazy. And by the way, these freedom riders, they went to jail sometimes for 50 days at a time, and that actually pans out pretty well. What happens? Sorry, I thought there isn't two. One of these guys starts, John Lewis, gets his start as a freedom rider. Okay, so I'm going to let you answer this. So pause it if you need more time. And I'm answering in 3, 2, 1. Freedom pictures. All right, now I'm going to skip some of these stuff for the purpose of this class and because I'm sticking to TEKS, but we can see a timeline of things that actually develop over time. I don't have time. Wallace is important. He becomes the governor of Alabama and becomes the main opponent to integration. You can see his famous quote there. I actually show the speech so you can see how crazy it is. I mean, he's standing in front of Confederate flags and everything, calling Alabama the cradle of the Confederacy, as if that's a good thing. Sit-ins spread all over Birmingham. If you get a chance to stop, you can pause and read these circumstances. Some people go to jail. Some counters close before it happens. Some people go get arrested. Some people are beat. That's not televised, or that's not shown as much. But they're essentially sit-ins. They're pushing the pressure in Alabama to do something, and we see that. At one point, Martin Luther King shows up to Birmingham, Alabama to do his thing, which is to march and have a reaction and get people to support ending segregation. And he does do a march. Police dogs are called to disperse the people, the onlookers. So the crowd, police dogs are called on a crowd. This is televised. This is done in papers. There is a court injunction on April 11th that says you cannot do boycotts, trespassing, parading, pickets, sit-ins, kneel-ins, wait-ins, and inciting and encouraging such acts. You will be, it's court ordered, you'll be thrown in jail. And on Good Friday, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy and Shuttlesworth will lead a march in defiance to that court injunction. And as they march, they'll be arrested and thrown in jail. And that's where Martin Luther King writes his infamous letter from Birmingham jail. And in this letter from Birmingham jail, he actually goes on to say, this is why we have to do what we do. He says, listen, he's actually responding to an editorial written by several religious leaders in the area. They're like, why are you doing this on Easter weekend? How dare you? Be patient. Things will happen. It'll get better. And Martin Luther King says, hey, there's two types of laws. There's just and unjust. And if there's an unjust law, you have a moral responsibility to disobey it. I mean, for him, Martin Luther King, the real question isn't why am I in jail disobeying these laws? It's why aren't you in here with me? Because everybody should disobey unjust laws. And he goes on to say, hey, you tell us wait. Wait. You always tell us wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And these people are saying, we've been waiting forever. It ain't happening. We know it's not happening. You're lying by telling us to wait. It cannot wait. Now is the time. The letter from Birmingham jail is well written and becomes like this literary piece and becomes a pretty big deal. But it establishes his argument that you should be here with me. Okay. So which method for achieving civil rights is most suited to Martin Luther King Jr.? Pause it. I'm going to answer in 3, 2, 1. So Birmingham jail extends and goes on and on and on. We'll have more marches, stopped by police, 32 arrested. We have people walking to register to vote. We have sit-ins. We have protesters. We have people protesting and arrested. We have black worshipers attend white church services. Some are turned away, but some are allowed in. Sit-ins at counters. Sporadic demonstrations randomly taking place, not all organized. Mass meetings at various churches. What do we do next? By May 1st, a judge is going to hand out a sentence for 5 days in jail and $50 fine for all those who ignored his injunction way back in April. Martin Luther King would go serve those 5 days later. He'd say, hey, it's the law. I broke it. I will go serve those 5 days. He doesn't run from it at all. Or didn't see Alabama. There's more demonstrations, ranging size from 30 to 60. We're going to see children. So you look this up, you'll learn more about this. It's like at one point, people realized that they're going to get fired, especially black people. Like, I can't do this. I'm going to get fired. I'll be on TV. They're going to see me. My boss is going to fire me. I can't do this. And children volunteer to do this. So children will do the marches, and we see this in various times and places. This isn't one big one. But sure enough, in Alabama, Bull O'Connor, the police, the sheriff, responds with these. Like, he arrests children, they throw them in detention camps. They turn the dogs on children. They turn water on children. Again, it's all being televised, and people in America are disgusted by this. And the government feels like they have to do something. Like, there's pressure on them that we can't allow this to happen. Wallace says you're breaking the law. That's what happens when you break the law. Eventually, there is a calm. May 10th, both sides agreed to calm things down after some of these marches. You can see some more pictures here from the marches. And then May 11th, the day after, they both agreed to like a treaty, like a peace agreement, kind of like armistice, if you will. A cooling off period is what they call it. The room where Martin Luther King was supposed to be staying at in the Gaston Motel is bombed. His brother's home is bombed as well. Nobody gets hurt. But as a matter of fact, I read about this. After they bombed the hotel, those kids that were in detention camps and in prison, in jail, they heard that same night the bombing happened. They found out later that it was the same night, but they said they were wondering why on the loudspeakers the guards started singing the South Will Rise or something like that, the Dixieland song. They started singing that because they thought they had killed Martin Luther King. They went back and they found out that cops were behind this. It was the cops in Birmingham played a role in this. Of course, I identified them as witnesses, saw it and saw them drop off the bombs, but nothing, of course, happens to it. And after that, JFK says, all right, I'm sending troops trained for riot to nearby military bases, and I'm going to bring them in, whatever has to be done. Of course, there's always an argument by contemporary historians. Martin Luther King points this out. He goes, Martin Luther King never sent in troops to help the blacks. He goes, no, Martin Luther King, or he goes, JFK sent in troops once white people were worried about something happening to them. But that's Malcolm X's viewpoints. It's a fair one to consider. Eventually, Martin Luther King turns this into a national scene. Like, it's already got national attention with all the pictures, all the beatings, and he's going to take this to Washington. He's going to organize 6 buses from Birmingham. People are going to drive to Washington, march to it's called the March on Washington, and at the Lincoln Memorial, he'll stand in front of there with 250,000 Americans in the pool, surrounding pool area at the Lincoln Memorial, and he gives an infamous speech, I Have a Dream, where he talks about his children one day holding hands with white children. He goes, the famous thing, not judged by the color of skin, but the content of their character. He goes, all we're asking is for America to cash a check that they wrote. He's referring to the amendments, the Civil War amendments. He goes, we're just asking you to actually do this. We've even got court cases. It's been done. We're just asking you to allow us to do what we were told we were going to do. We believe in a future. It's hard to hate this guy after this. He's very positive. He's very clear that we're not trying to destroy or take anything away from anybody. We just want to be treated the same. That's it. And we believe that all men are created equal, as we've seen in documents in America so many times. We just believe what you believe. And he actually, if you look at the 250,000 Americans that went there, the March on Washington, it wasn't all black at all. It was actually a mix. White people from all over are going to join this as well. This movement isn't specifically for black people at all. Others are going to chime in. That's what Martin Luther King wanted. He wanted that attention. He wanted other people to join it. It benefits them in the long run. So his March on Washington ends with the I Have a Dream speech. And that I Have a Dream speech, he meets with JFK later on, and JFK promises that we're going to get civil rights legislation passed. JFK was open about that. He wanted that. Unfortunately, JFK gets popped in the head shortly after this. But nonetheless, it's a different unit. All right, pause it when you're ready, or pause it, and then play it when you're ready for me to answer it. I'm answering 3, 2, 1. Pause it. I'm going to answer it in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to skip this. It's not much. It's something to talk about, but it's not in the TEKS. But it just shows you how bad things got. There was a 16th Street bombing where these 4 little girls died in a bombing. The guys that were found guilty, they got away with it for a long time, for years, as a matter of fact. They were white supremacists. And it just shows you that these people weren't protesting or anything. There was a Sunday, they were at church, and in that church building, these 4 girls were walking up a stairwell together, and they were murdered by white supremacists. Everybody knew it. Even the FBI got called in and said they were going to do an investigation, and they knew who did it, but they couldn't pinpoint the crime. They couldn't get them to admit to it. There's a whole story behind this. But this just shows you how bad it was. Little girls. It wasn't just like, oh, stop protesting. You're causing trouble. Like Wallace has said. He goes, you're agitators. You're breaking the law. These people were at church. These little girls were at church, and they died at church. If you can't attend church, you can't, there's no place safe for you. Eventually, the I Have a Dream speech is known to convince JFK to do something for civil rights. And when JFK died, Johnson takes it up as one of his things. I got to get this done for JFK. And so he passes the Civil Rights Act of 64, which the main part is number 1. That's why I have it number 1. Prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, or ethnic origin in hotels, restaurants, and in all places of employment. You can no longer say, I'm not hiring that guy because he's black, or any religious reason at all, right? And restaurants cannot be segregated anymore. Hotels cannot be segregated. They got rid of all that. This was the Civil Rights Act of 64. And so if schools don't listen up, then they're going to lose federal aid. The federal government is going to cut off money to schools if they were still segregated. So now schools are going to get on board. Like they should have done it already. There was a court case about this, Brown versus Board, but now you have to do it. To help blacks get registered, they're going to get a federal government power to register votes. So no longer do you have to go to only the county courthouse. you can register to vote at your federal courthouse. That's going to be a problem we're going to talk about in a little bit. We're also going to see in the same year, Civil Rights Act 64, same year, we'll see the 24th Amendment eliminates poll taxes in federal elections. They had to pass an amendment for that because essentially the U.S. Constitution doesn't say the requirements for voting, right? So if it doesn't tell you in the Constitution, it's left up to the states to decide. 10th Amendment. If the powers listed aren't to the federal government, then it's left up to the states to decide. And so for states could do that. So states in the South put a poll tax on everybody. But if your grandfather voted, you didn't have to pay a poll tax. It's called the grandfather clause. If grandfather voted, you didn't have to pay a poll tax. If grandfather voted, you didn't have to do a literacy test. Of course, if you're black, your grandfather couldn't vote because he was a slave, right? So it was, again, the target was there. The states made it legal. So the federal government says, fine, we can change that by passing an amendment in the Constitution because all states have to follow the amendments. And so the 24th Amendment eliminates poll taxes in federal elections. But technically, they couldn't get rid of poll taxes in states because it's for the states. So try to answer this. Pause it. I'm going to answer it. 3, 2, 1. Easy one, right? Okay, pause it. I'm going to answer it. In 3, 2, 1. Notice it didn't say Civil Rights Act of 64. Right? They instead of saying Civil Rights Act of 1964, they actually just explained what the act was. So you're supposed to be able to know that. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 stops discrimination in public places, stops segregation, right? Now, once you read this, you can say, okay, I know the march. The March on Washington led to that. And you can figure out which one it is. Martin Luther King's next move would be Selma in 65. The Civil Rights Act was passed. African Americans could register to vote. But there weren't a lot of federal courthouses to do this. My example is there's only one in all of Houston. So federal courthouses weren't easy access. They allowed you to vote, register. But if you went to your county courthouse, you still had poll tax for local elections. You still had literacy tests. That was the big thing about this, the literacy tests. And so Martin Luther King goes to Selma. There, he's going to work with local chapters of SNCC. They're going to help him work to boycott nonviolence. And in Selma, it's actually where they do a march. And the first one, these people are beaten on the bridge. This movie's awesome. You got to watch this movie. People are beaten on the bridge in this march by the local sheriff. And it makes nation headline news. It gets so bad, people from all over America will come to Selma to join Martin Luther King on the second march. He says, we're going to join you in the second march. We're going to make this happen. And the second march is allowed to happen. The president calls in and says, you better not stop this. You better watch out, Wallace. Governor Wallace was doing everything he could to stop this and allows it to happen. This young man is a man by the name of John Lewis. He is one of the SNCC guys in Selma, and that's how he gets his start when he first meets Martin Luther King. And he actually becomes an important player in the civil rights activist. This is him as an older man when he was in Congress. He recently died a few years ago. But John Lewis becomes a legend in his own. Okay. Now, the march to Selma essentially does lead to the Civil Rights Act of 65, which in fact gets rid of the literacy test, suspends all literacy tests and local poll taxes. I just teach my kids, remember the literacy test part for Civil Rights Act of 65? The poll taxes, I don't want them to confuse that with the 24th Amendment. And STAAR never gets that detailed. If you go in a history major and you major in this area, you do need to know the difference. But our STAAR test is pretty standard in that. Here's a question. Go ahead and pause it if you need to. I'm going to answer it. 3, 2, 1. That's John Lewis. You can almost tell just from reading his biography there and going on. All right, only 31% of students got this right. I could not believe it. More actually picked one answer that was wrong. Pause it. I'm going to answer it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, more people, higher percentage actually put this one. And I just think it's students in Texas saw voting and they saw the first thing about that. That's obviously wrong. But nonetheless, the answer is G, Voting Rights Act ends literacy test. So my students, I'm at this point in class, I'm like, voting rights, 65 ends the literacy test. Civil Rights Act of 64 ends discrimination in employment and segregation. Like, you just got to know that. Just memorize those and you'll be good. Okay. I'm going to answer this one. 3, 2, 1. It's actually pretty simple if you just know what you know. And last, we have a man by the name of Billy Graham. Okay, this is actually a TEK, actually a standard you have to know. I'll show you some sample questions in a second. He's a Christian preacher. He's an advisor to multiple presidents. Didn't get along too great with Obama. But by that time, he's gone very old school conservative. But he's actually the one who's against segregation. He's the one that convinced Eisenhower to help out at Little Rock. He bailed MLK out from jail at one point. He's actually one of the only preachers to go behind the Iron Curtain where communism was and spread Christianity for other sides, calling for world peace. So he's infamous. He's pretty infamous at the time. STAAR Test has never asked about him, but he is literally, his name, exact name is a TEK. So it's just a matter of time. And that's all we have for civil rights.